Hello, and welcome to another episode in our series about the history and continued evolution of RxP. I am Dr. George Kapalka, Program Director of the Master of Science degree in Clinical Psychopharmacology at Alliant University. In this series, we focus on the major developments in the RxP movement from its inception to the present. Today, I welcome Dr. Beth Rom-Rymer to talk about prescriptive authority for psychologists in Illinois, as well as Dr. Rom-Rymer's distinguished career in psychology. We will especially focus on the history of RxP in Illinois, as well as its impact nationally and internationally. First, a few words about Dr. Rom-Rymer's accomplishments. She was a member of the first class of women undergraduates at Princeton University in 1973. And since that time, she has been incredibly active in many portions of the country and in many areas of activity, many types of psychology pursuits, and many aspects of the profession of psychology. In the 1970s, she was the first board president of Refuge House, a shelter for domestic violence survivors in Tallahassee, Florida, and she helped to create the field of forensic geriatrics. She was a member of the APA Board of Directors and the chair of the APA Council leadership team. She was president of APA Divisions 55, the Prescribing Psychology, as well as 56, Psychology of Trauma, and the Illinois Psychological Association. She was vice president of the Board of Trustees at Alliant International University. She was president and chair of the National Register for Health Service Psychologists. She has held many administrative positions in psychiatric hospitals throughout the Chicago metropolitan area, including the Chicago Lakeshore Hospital. She taught in the departments of psychiatry and psychology, including at the University of Chicago, Northwestern University, Rosalind Franklin School of Medicine, and the Massachusetts School of Professional Psychology. She is founder, president, and CEO of the Illinois Association of Prescribing Psychologists, and she is the co-founder and president of the Association of Jewish Psychologists. She is active in philanthropy, including the support of the training of native psychologists and clinical psychopharmacology as part of the Alliant University APA Division 18 Fund, the support of travel scholarship to the annual APA Convention for Native Psychology students, and dissertation research awards for Native psychology students who are members of the Society of Indian Psychologists. She supports the Psychology of Antisemitism Fund with the American Psychological Association. She has received multiple awards, some of which she has gotten multiple times, including Distinguished Illinois Psychologist and Outstanding Psychologist Award from the Illinois Psychological Association. She was awarded the Outstanding Psychologist of the Year award by APA Division 31, which is the division of the State, Provincial, and Territorial Affairs. She has received the APA Presidential Citation for Outstanding Leadership and the APA Carl Heiser Award for Legislative Advocacy. She has been honored with the Distinguished Service and Leadership Award and Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Register of Health Service Psychologists. She was awarded as an inspirational leader from the South African Psychological Society. She has been honored with the Honored Value Ally from the Society of Indian Psychologists. And of course, she has been the main driving force behind the Illinois RxP movement. Welcome, Dr. Beth Rom-Rymer.
Thank you, Dr. Kapalka, so much for that wonderful, humbling introduction. Thank you so much.
So You and I originally met at the Prescribing Psychologist Register, which is a place where so many of the pioneers of the RxP movement have first gotten together.
Yes.
Uh, we have a separate episode about that, but tell us a little bit about how you first became interested in psychopharmacology.
So in the late 1990s, I was seeing many patients, I'd say really the mid 1990s, I was seeing many patients who, for the first time, were telling me that they were being prescribed medications for their anxiety and depression. It became a cascade of prescriptions for my patients. And I was saying, I need to know more about psychopharmacology and the medications that you're taking, the risks and benefits. I want to talking to their psychiatrist, talking to their general practice physicians, their PCPs, and I started talking to people and finding out where can I get the training. I want to be an expert in this as well. And I found out about Sam Feldman and his prescribing psychologist register. And I signed up. I signed up in 1997, I believe, and then did 2 years of all of the training, in-person training. He had the videotapes. When I couldn't do it in person, I got the videotapes. I would sit in my living room and watch the videotapes and then do the questions and do the tests at the end. And I was traveling to New York and California and Vermont and Oklahoma. I was traveling all over the country to try to get the in-person training. And then we did the exam, the Veritas exam, right, in 1999, I believe, and did very well on that and passed that exam. The training was so enjoyable. I learned so much. My knowledge became much more broad based, and I have always had a belief that we need to understand all aspects of psychological functioning, and we need to understand all aspects of psychopharmacological treatment and psychological treatment. And I strongly believe that psychologists need to have that full scope of training and treatment options. And I was really very happy to have learned that knowledge. And then in 2000, I jumped into the Division 55, the newly created Division 55. Talked to Jack Wiggins, who was just so wonderful and welcoming, who just, as you know, celebrated his 100th birthday. So he said, Beth, I'm so glad you're here. I want you to be membership chair. So I became membership chair in 2000. And then in 2002, he said to me, oh, I just nominated you for president of Division 55. And I said, what? What are you talking about? He said, yeah, president of Division 55. My mother had gotten sick. And so I was spending a lot of time taking care of my mother. And all of a sudden, I was told that I was on the ballot and people were voting for me. And I said, really? How did that happen? And then I made some phone calls and I won. I was the fourth president, beginning my term in January 2004 of Division 55.
So at the time, late 1990s, early 2000s, there was a lot of excitement about RxP. If
Oh,
you
yes.
when we were in the RxP movement,
Guam, 1999, New Mexico,
Guam, that's right.
2002.
And
Yes,
and then I'm leading up to, of course, New Mexico and Louisiana starting in
yes.
2002. But I guess what I'm curious about is in the late 1990s and early 2000, as this groundwork was already taking place in other states like Louisiana and New Mexico, what were some of the steps? What was some of the groundwork that was being laid in Illinois?
Well, the prescriptive authority movement began in Illinois in 1991. Marlon Hoover was one of the earliest movers. Terry Kohler, who had been executive director of the Illinois Psychological Association since the 1990s and then through 2021. So Terry and Marlon, Bruce Bonecutter, These folks were very much involved in the prescriptive authority movement. They kind of saw what was being done in Florida. And then, of course, in 1996, the APA passed its resolution, and the council agreed, passed the proposal that psychologists could become prescribing psychologists as long as it was postdoctorally, as long as the training began postdoctorally. And then, of course, Guam passed its prescriptive authority legislation in 1999. So excitement was building in Illinois and the Illinois Psychological Association, and folks started talking about it. And Marlon was eager. I remember when I took the training with Sam Feldman with PPR, and Marlon took training at another university in Chicago that only had a training cohort for 2 years. I tried to get in that one, but it closed before I could begin that. There were those of us who wanted the training, who wanted to become prescribing psychologists, and those who were very, very much supportive. I was the fourth president of Division 55 in the early 2000s, and then became increasingly active in the Illinois Psychological Association. I was supportive of the prescriptive authority movement in Illinois. So then when in 2010, when I was elected president-elect of the Illinois Psychological Association, many of these colleagues came over to me and said, okay, you're doing it, you're advocating for this on a national level, you must do it here in Illinois. And I said, well, only if you would be part of my team. And if we could figure out a way to raise the money to be able to lobby for this legislation, but raise it in a way where people who were opposed to prescriptive authority legislation, and at that time, there were many people opposed to prescriptive authority legislation, that they wouldn't be able to stop it. I mean, we wouldn't want them to pay for it if they didn't want to. And at the same time, we wouldn't want them to be powerful enough to stop this legislation for those who wanted to take advantage of being able to become prescribers in the state of Illinois.
So when Louisiana and New Mexico passed in 2002, Louisiana in 2004, were there attempts or any kind of introduction of legislation in Illinois, or not yet?
I would say there was some introduction, but it didn't go anywhere. It was on a committee. We had a legislator who was supportive, but she really wasn't able to get much traction, and it just never got. It would get 1 or 2 votes in the committee, and that was it. So it just never got more traction in the first 10 years of the first decade of the 2000s. And Marlon Hoover was president of IPA and was heading it, and certainly all the discussions, psychologists were excited about it, but we couldn't get the legislature to move.
What were some of the unique challenges in Illinois?
So Illinois is a northern industrial state, and it's the 5th largest state in the country. And so, we're working with a more sophisticated voting population, sophisticated legislators, and a strong society of psychiatrists, the Illinois Psychiatric Society, Illinois Medical Society, that typically supported the Illinois Psychiatric Society. The home of the AMA is in Chicago. So we had we were fighting our fiercest adversary, and they were right there in our hometown of Chicago. And we have to say there were psychologists who were opposed. So there was psychologist opposition, there was psychiatric opposition, there was the Med Society opposition. The AMA was part of it, and because we were such a large state and a northern industrial state, there were people that were fighting us very hard.
What finally led to this success? What were some of the strategies that you utilized to be able to pass it in Illinois?
Thank you. So we had many strategies, as you can imagine. So as I said, my colleagues kind of persuaded me to take this on. I wasn't sure that I wanted to take this on. I wanted to use my political capital to take this on, but they said, no, we're going to do this with you. And so I agreed. So the first strategy was to get the council, the Illinois Psychological Association Council, behind this movement to pursue this aggressively. And we had at the time we had a very good lobbyist for the Illinois Psychological Association, but he wasn't somebody who was necessarily, steeped in the history of RxP, and not somebody who could go out there and challenge the status quo. And he was busy. He was busy with other legislation that was important to psychologists in Illinois. So I suggested that we hire a lobbying team that would specifically focus on prescriptive authority. And we interviewed several different lobbying teams. And I spoke to a former legislator. So this was in 2010. I spoke to a former legislator, and he said, I know a few different lobbying teams. Tell me tell me a little bit about the legislation that you're proposing. So I talked about prescriptive authority, and he said, I have just the lobbying team for you. You will now benefit in 2010, 2011, 2012. You will now benefit from recent legislative achievements in which optometrists have gotten broader scope of practice, where nurses have gotten broader scope of practice, where physician's assistants have gotten broader scope of practice. And so you are coming at a very good time in Illinois history. So he connected us to the Taylor-Ewey lobbying team in 2011. And my colleagues went to speak with him. We interviewed several different teams, and we talked with Taylor-Ewey, and we said, well, what's your strategy? How are you going to do this? This is very difficult legislation to pass. What are you going to do? And they said, we're going to make sure that we get legislative successes. Once we get legislative successes under our belt, then we will meet with the psychiatrists. And I know that when we had met with another lobbying team, they had said, well, first we have to go talk to the psychiatrist. I said, no, that's not, we can't do that first. And indeed, Taylor-Ewey said, no, that's right. We're not going to do that first, because they're our adversary. We need to show them that we're strong, that we're bold, that we can get success, and then we'll talk with the psychiatrists. So we decided to hire them. And on January 1st, 2012, they started as our lobbying team that would be an adjunct to our other lobbyist for the Illinois Psychological Association, and that they would lead the prescriptive authority movement in Illinois. So Mark Taylor, who is one of the principals of Taylor-Ewey, he had worked very closely with the president pro tem, Don Harmon, of the Illinois state legislature for many, many years. They were partners in a law firm. And then Don won elective office in the state, and Mark went and started his lobbying firm. And Mark said, let's sit down with Senator Don Harmon, and let's see what he thinks. So we sat down with a group of us, about 10 of us from the IPA Council, went to sit down with Don Harmon, and we talked to him for an hour and a half, and we talked about the need in Illinois to have prescribers, that there was a scarcity of prescribers, that there was inadequate resources for many of the most needy folks in our constituency, in our state. And that waiting lists, the story, waiting lists for 6 months to a year and a half for any kind of psychiatric attention. Of the 102 counties in Illinois, I think there were 25 counties that had psychiatrists. There were 46 counties that had psychologists, and the counties in which there were psychologists were then adjacent to counties that didn't have psychiatrists. So we talked about how much of a dire need there was, and how the 5,000 psychologists in Illinois could provide the care that was sorely needed in Illinois. And Don Harmon came out of that meeting. He said, you didn't need to really be too persuasive, because I already knew that there was a dire need and that our mental health system was broken. But now that I've heard you, I'm even more convinced, and I'm with you, and I'm going to be your legislative champion. And from that day on, from January of 2012 to today, in 2026, and Don Harmon is now the president of our Illinois Senate, that he continues to be a wonderful spokesman and champion for prescriptive authority for psychologists.
It was so important to have such an ally.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Such a man who's very smart and very thoughtful and very happy to be a spokesperson for improved mental health care for all of our folks in Illinois. In working with our lobbyists, I drove around the state of Illinois meeting with groups of psychologists, 2 people at a time, 4 people at a time, maybe 6 psychologists at a time, from top to bottom of our state, 600 miles south, 600 miles north, east and west. And there were some questions about, will psychologists who don't want to prescribe, would they be second-class citizens? And how long would it take? And what would the insurance costs be? So Jennifer Morrison, one of our lobbyists in our team of lobbyists, said, you know what, let's have some sessions where we talk about these issues. So we brought in, I brought in 2 psychologists from Louisiana to talk about what it's like to be a prescribing psychologist, and what it's like to be partnered with a prescribing psychologist, but not to be a prescribing psychologist. What is it like to say, well, I'm in a prescribing state, but I don't want to prescribe. And our psychologists heard this, and what they heard was that, you choose your specialty. Not everybody has to be a prescribing psychologist in a prescribing state. You're a neuropsychologist, you're a developmental psychologist, you're a child psychologist, you specialize in ADHD, whatever it is that you choose to specialize in, that's fantastic. Pursue your dreams. And if you want to be a prescribing psychologist, if you want to have that full scope of treatment, you can also do that. And then we talked to the liability issues. And we found out that liability for prescribing psychologists in the prescribing states of Mexico and Louisiana was quite low. It was maybe $50 to $75 additional liability insurance above what a non-prescribing psychologist would pay. It was very important information, and it was a relief to those psychologists that, well, this is going to be thousands of dollars in liability insurance, but that wasn't the case. It continues to not be the case. Today, the liability insurance is only about $100 more than a non-prescribing psychologist. And then for non-prescribing psychologists, they don't have to pay an additional liability insurance just because they're in a prescribing state. We gave them a lot of information that was helpful, and that was what felt to be kind of assuring all of our psychologists that they would be comfortable whether they wanted to be a prescriber or not. And we had 4 different workshops. We held a workshop in Chicago, where our Illinois Psychological Association headquarters were, and then we had a workshop in Springfield, the capital of our state. And initially in Chicago, we had 30 participants in our workshop, and about 10 in Springfield. When we got to the 4th workshop, where we had Marlon Hoover and Ken Kessler, who was then the chair of our licensing board, talk about what they envisioned as the implementation of a prescriptive authority statute. We had over 100 people in our Chicago session with standing room only. We had over 30 people in our Springfield meeting. So we created a wonderful buzz and a wonderful feeling of, yeah, maybe we could do this, and how good it's going to be for all of us if we're able to pass prescriptive authority.
And, this really underscores the importance of boots on the ground
Boots
and
on the ground.
gathering support and gathering momentum. And as you said earlier, by the time you sit down with those who oppose you, like psychiatrists, if you have built a lot of support and a lot of momentum, you have a different role at that bargaining table.
That's right. At the apex of our lobbying, we had teams of psychologists and colleagues go out around the state of Illinois in teams of 3 and 4 in each of our districts, and each of our 102 counties. We had every single legislator covered by our teams. We had 640 psychologists out of 5,000 working to pass this legislation with tremendous enthusiasm. There were still the naysayers, I have to say. We still had the naysayers, but the enthusiasm grew tremendously.
What role did NAMI play?
Okay. So I love to talk about NAMI. I think you know this story very well. So historically, NAMI began in the 1950s as an organization that was started by families of loved ones who had significant mental illness. And these family members needed help. They needed help for their loved ones. And at that time, psychologists were not particularly interested in working with this group of constituents, these family members, but psychiatrists were. So psychiatrists and NAMI folks immediately became aligned and really grew the National Alliance on Mental Illness together over the decades. So when psychologists began to be more interested in working with NAMI in the 80s and the 1980s and 1990s, psychiatrists said, we don't need you. We don't want you. We don't need you. And the family member said, we're fine. Psychiatrists are always here to help us. Psychologists, you're kind of coming in late to the story. So we're not interested in working with you at this time. So then we started in the early 2000s. Again, Jennifer Morrison knew very well the executive director of the state NAMI in Illinois and introduced us. And Jennifer said, this group wants to be able to pass legislation that would provide needed care for family members in NAMI. And we believe that this is something that our communities can benefit from. Will you invite them to speak at the state convention in 2012? And the executive director at the time said, yes, I will invite them. And prior to that, my goodness, we tried to present at NAMI in the early 2000s. We tried to do exhibits, some of our literature at NAMI State Convention, and we were not permitted to do that. Again, psychiatry was saying, nope, nope. You weren't with us in the beginning, or you're not going to come, to kind of rain on our parade now, even though, of course, it's not raining on the parade. We're joining forces. We're partnering with you. But 2012, in September of 2012, so I organized a panel. We had a psychiatrist who came and spoke on our panel to support Prescriptive Authority. We had the director of patient care at a very large federally qualified healthcare center in Illinois. We had Bob Rinaldi speak, who was a prescribing psychologist at that time in Mexico, although living in Illinois. And I believe that Marlon spoke. And I think that I also invited Nadia Webb, who was prescribing in Louisiana. She came down again to speak on our panel. So we had a fantastic panel. When we finished, the audience at the NAMI audience were literally standing on their chairs and cheering for us. Say, yes, we need you. We don't have enough providers. Yes, we need you. When can we start working with you? And there was an administrator from NAMI National who was in the room, and she kind of walked up to the front of the room, as with all this excitement, and she said, "Just a moment, hold on. NAMI can't take a position, pro or con, for Prescriptive Authority. We'll have a meeting in March, and we'll invite Dr. Rom-Rymer to come and speak to our NAMI state group, and we'll see what our NAMI group votes. But let's curb our enthusiasm a little bit. We can't do anything right now." So sure enough, we met. We were invited to meet. So Nadia Webb and I went to talk with the state board of NAMI. There was a psychologist on our state board, but he mysteriously was out of town at that meeting. And usually they have a psychiatrist on the board. Well, so not only was the psychiatrist there, but there was another psychiatrist who came to speak at that meeting. And then one of our psychologists who was very much opposed to Prescriptive Authority was invited to speak. From the start, we were not in a strong position in presenting to that, group, even though I had spoken to several of the board members before that meeting. But the sense of that meeting was the tenor of that meeting was prescriptive authorities, psychologists, they're not going to be well enough trained. They're really not going to be, they're not going to help us. And we just need more psychiatrists, and we can do psychiatrists can do telehealth. And why are we bringing another group into this community when we don't need them? So despite that enthusiasm from our September meeting, we got a no vote from NAMI in March of 2013, but we were able to elicit a promise from the executive director of NAMI that we would continue our discussions. So we were able to tell that to the Illinois State Senate. And when we had our vote on April 25th of 2013 in our state Senate, we got a yes vote of 25-10, because we said, we're talking to NAMI. And so I went to the executive director and I said, you know what? When our legislation passes, you will be first on our list. And I promise you, we will partner with you. We will work closely with you. And we know that there are needs that are not being met among families in Illinois, and we will be there to join hands with you, to partner with you. And she said, okay. So when we passed, I called her, and I had several other people on my list who didn't support us, but with whom I was developing relationships. And I said, we're going to continue. We're going to work together. We're going to be able to provide resources and services that have not been accessible by many communities. And I called them, and they immediately came on board. And of course, now I'm on the board of Illinois State NAMI, and all of NAMI is very much supportive in our state is very much supportive of prescriptive authority, and our board members have talked to board members around the country to be able to advocate for NAMI support. And we have support in Washington State. NAMI is supportive, and in other states, NAMI has been supportive. So I'm very, very happy to talk about that great success story as a part of what our legislative movement has accomplished.
So now we're in 2013, I guess, when the legislation started to pass it. I think the governor signed it in 2014. So tell us all about that. How did it actually happen that the governor signed it, and all the steps that led up to it?
Right. So we passed out of the Senate as of March 25th in 2013, and then we needed to go to the House. So we needed another full year to lobby the representatives in the House. So we went that summer, and we actually had to hire more lobbyists to work with, because they were in the House. So there are 119 members in the House. There are 60 members in the Senate. And there was the Republican caucus, the Women's caucus, the LGBTQ caucus, the Black caucus, the Hispanic caucus. And we needed to be able to lobby each of those caucuses. So we needed to get additional lobbyists to work with each of those caucuses. And we needed to raise money. So I took responsibility for raising money for this whole effort, so that we would be able to pay for this immense effort, to add these extra lobbyists. And so I did it outside of the Illinois Psychological Association, because there were members who would not contribute, and we needed thousands of dollars. We ended up needing $650,000 to pass this legislation. We had $200,000 that came from the APA, but the rest of it I had to raise from philanthropists and others who serious mental illness was an issue in their families, and there was an issue of which they had great concern, and they wanted to contribute to this effort. And I got law enforcement involved. So I called the chief of police in Champaign County, in central Illinois. I think he had called me, said, "Oh, I'm hearing something about this prescriptive, can you tell me more? And so I talked to him about what we were doing, and he said, Beth, I wish you had called me earlier. He said, I am so much in favor of what you're doing. He said, I know that my officers get trained in shooting, the shooting range. They have training every month. They get it. They're examined every 3 months. They in Central Illinois, they don't. Thank goodness, there's not much reason for them to use their guns. But what we see every day, we see people on the streets, people who are mentally ill on the streets. And he said, there's nowhere for them to go. So our officers have to take them to the jail. We don't want to take them there. Our officers don't want to take them there, but there's nowhere else for them to go. We need help. We want to support you with whatever we can do. And he was wonderful. He then went with his deputy, and then took the sheriff from the Champaign County Police Department. So we had the City of Champaign Police Department, then we had the Sheriff's Department in Champaign, and they both went with their deputies in uniform to the legislature to lobby for us. And then he was able to get the support of the Illinois Police Chiefs Association, the Illinois Sheriff's Association, the Sheriff of Cook County also gave us his support. And that kind of law enforcement support was just incredibly helpful, and meant so much to our movement and to our state, that law enforcement was standing behind this, because 40% of the inmates in the Cook County Jail are diagnosed with a mental illness, and they need mental health care. So much so that the sheriff of Cook County hired a psychologist, the first psychologist in the country, to be the executive director, to be the chief warden of the Cook County Jail. And she was a woman, and hiring her made a huge statement to the public that he's concerned about mental health and mental illness and wants it treated. And he, again, was a major partner of ours. So we got the support of law enforcement. And then as we headed towards the committee vote in the House, the Health and Human Services Committee, we took a roll call of all of the 119 House members, and we needed 60. We had 30 votes in a roll call, and that was on May 1st of 2014. And so we busily lobbied the 9 committee members, the Health and Human Services, and we were hoping that they would pass, but there was certainly no guarantee. We had Bob Rinaldi testify. We had another psychologist who was very active in his church, and he testified that his church, very large church in Illinois, and the NAACP chapter of Illinois was supporting us. And then we had the psychologist who was very opposed to prescriptive authority testifying against us, with the psychiatrist. And one of the legislators said to the psychologist who was opposed, she said, look, our mental health system is broken. We can't just continue to do things the way we always have. We need something different. And when it came to a vote of the committee, we got a vote of 9-5. So we were ecstatic that we passed out of committee on May 7th of 2014. And then we took a roll call the day after that committee hearing. And what do you think we got of that roll call? We expected a good result. What did we get? The vote had been 30 prior to the committee hearing. It was now down to 25. What were we going to do? Why the vote was eroding? And because the Psychiatric Society, the Medical Society were up in arms. We can't do this. The psychologists are going to kill patients. So they got the legislators scared. And I had a meeting with a legislator, and she said to me, what are you trying to do? get rid of the psychiatry, get rid of the profession. And I said, that's not on us. We're here to provide services that are very much needed in Illinois. And psychiatry, we need to work with psychiatry. We're not here to push them out. Our patients need all of us, not just one of us. They need all of us. So then on May 17th, we sat down, our Don Harmon and our chief legislative advocate in the House sat down with the with the chief lobbyist for 2 nurses associations in Illinois, and they said to her, "We need your help. We've worked very closely with you. We've gotten more authority for nurses, for practicing nurses, for advanced practice nurses. Will you help us?" And she said, "Let me go back to my 2 associations. Let me ask them if they will take away their opposition and remove their opposition, and they will support you." So she went back to them. She came back the next day. You know what? She said, "If you add some additional education and training experiences, we will then take away our opposition, and we will support you." So Don Harmon said, "That's fantastic." And then she said, "You know what? I can also get the psychiatrists to the negotiating table." And our lobbyist said, "That's fantastic," because they have not sat down with us. And that's very unusual in this kind of a negotiation, this kind of a lobbying environment where there's a controversial bill for the adversary not to sit down with us. That doesn't happen. So she said, "Well, I'm going to bring them together." So it was so May 27th, 2014, it happens to be my birthday, which is why I know the date so well. It's on my birthday. I drove down to Springfield and we met with the president of the Illinois Psychiatric Society, the president of the Illinois Med Society, with their lobbyists, and then I as president of the Illinois Psychological Association and our lobbyists, and then the chief lobbyist for the 2 Nurses Association. We all sat down. We spent the day around a very large rectangular table going back and forth, where they would say, "Well, what about if you do this?" And we said, "No." They said, "What about if you do this?" And we said, "Well, maybe." And they said, "What about if you take this away?" And they said, "Well, I don't know." And at the end of the day, we agreed that we would go back to our different groups. I would go back to the psychologists, psychiatric side would go back to the psychiatrists, and that if both sides agreed to what we gave agreement to that day, which was a series of additional training and additional educational experiences, that the Psychiatric Society and the Medical Society would withdraw their opposition, would not support us, would be neutral, but the important thing is that they would withdraw their opposition. Jennifer Morrison, one of our lobbyists, said to me, "Beth, you have a moment in which you could pass prescriptive authority in Illinois with the compromises that the Psychiatric Society was offering to you. If you don't do it now, our governor, who had been very supportive, Governor Pat Quinn, had been very supportive of us, and he was up for reelection. It was not a certainty that he would win reelection, and if he lost, his opponent, Bruce Rauner, was more aligned with the physicians, and that Bruce Rauner could be in office for 8 years, and we probably couldn't pass legislative authority, prescriptive authority during those 8 years. And then who knows what would come after that. We had spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars. We had spent time and energy and commitment. And when might that happenstance occur again? She said, "You have a moment. Are you going to take this moment to pass?" So I went back to my group and I said, "What do you think? Can we do this?" They said yes. The next day we told the psychiatrist that. Next day the psychiatrist came back and they said yes. It went before the House, and before the vote we had 25 votes. Well, once we told the House that the psychiatrists and the Med Society were withdrawing their opposition, we then got a vote of 91 to 25, And that was just a fantastic day. And then many legislators said, I'm so glad that you trade associations came to an agreement. We didn't want to come out on one side or another. We're just happy that you guys are working together. And then it had to go back to the Senate on Friday, May 30th, for concurrence, because the legislation had changed significantly because of the meeting that we had on May 27th. So the Senate had to concur. And then at the 11th hour, literally 11:30 p.m., just as the legislative session was coming to an end, Don Harmon brought our legislation to a vote. And this time we got a vote of 49-0 and a unanimous vote in the Senate. And we got the passage that we were hoping for. And then because Governor Paquin had been working with us, had been supportive of us, as a matter of fact, his health policy expert and his psychiatric expert for the state, he had both of them who were working for him, working for the state, who were working to support us. And so then on June 25th, he signed our legislation into law.
So let's talk about what were some of these compromises and what are some of the differences between the prescriptive authority law in Illinois as compared to other states, like, for example, New Mexico.
So right now, as of today, prescribing psychologists can prescribe for adults from the age of 17 to 65. There's one anxiolytic on Schedule 3, flunitrazepam, that we can't prescribe. We can't prescribe for medications on Schedule 2 and Schedule 1.
You can prescribe medications scheduled 5, 4, and 3, right?
Correct. And I'm emphasizing as of today, because while we are speaking right now, we have legislation that's before our House that is expanding our prescriptive authority above the age of 65. It's now May 19th. We have till May 31st this year, which is a Sunday night. So May 31st, early morning, June 1st. Don Harmon is president of our state Senate. And so we were able to get a very strong vote in our state Senate. We went to the House committee, the state licensing committee. Just 3 weeks ago, we got a vote of 10-4. So that was a slight improvement from what we got in 2014. And that was so that we could expand our authority to older adults. Again, just to explain that our plan is every year where we go back to the legislature to continually ask for an expansion of our authority. But the first thing that we wanted to approach was being able to remove the age constraint. So a couple years ago, we started by trying to remove the age constraints, both over 65 and under 17. That didn't get much traction. So now we're moving the older adult, and we have a lot of traction now, and crossing our fingers that in the next 2 weeks we pass that legislation. So we would still then be constrained from prescribing to children and adolescents under the age of 17. We cannot now, as I said, prescribe psychostimulants on Schedule 2. We cannot prescribe to pregnant women. We cannot prescribe to people with severe medical illness. We can't prescribe to people who are severely developmentally delayed. We can't prescribe injectables. Those are the primary constraints that we're working under right now. But we're going to keep expanding that authority over the next several years. But it takes time. It's not one and done. And that's something that I always talk about with all the states. And of course, as we're doing international work, we're talking about that as well. It's not one and done. For the nurses, it took them 30, 40 years to expand their authority. Physicians' assistants, over a period of 20, 30 years, taking for them to expand their authority. So it takes time for us. And in terms of our training, so we have the most expansive training requirements of any of the 8 states so far. So we have, in addition to the master's degree in clinical psychopharmacology, and you are the director of the training program at Alliant. So in addition to that MSCP training, We also require a series of 8 undergraduate science courses. And we also have a series of 9 rotations in the medical specialties, including gynecology, obstetrics, surgery, psychiatry, internal medicine, emergency medicine, general medicine, psychiatry, that form kind of the 3 legs of a 3-legged stool for prescribing psychologists. The undergraduate training classes that we're expected to take that include biology for science, chemistry lab, microbiology, anatomy, physiology, those are courses that every prescribing and non-prescribing medical professional in Illinois and mostly around the world take. So it's not an unusual undergraduate curriculum. And then the rotations, I have to say, the rotations for our prescribing psychologists are exhilarating. The prescribing psychologists are fellows in training institutions. I always look at that as a great gift to prescribing psychologists because as soon as that legislation passed, I again drove around the state of Illinois and I was talking to the medical directors of our various medical centers, and the medical directors and the CEOs. And the medical directors were typically psychiatrists. What did the psychiatrists say to me when I came to talk to them and told them either they knew already, many of them did not know that we had passed our legislation, but they said to us, "We were your most vociferous opponents and while you were trying to pass this legislation, but now it's passed." And then they go, "Sotto voce, we need you. Let's do this together." And we have. So having that opportunity to reach out to medical centers around the state and partner with them, give them an opportunity to be a part of our movement, I believe has been a great gift to us.
How many of those do you currently have that you partner with in Illinois for students to complete those rotations?
So we have several around the state. Ascension Health Medical Center which has undergone a lot of name changes over these years. But Ascension Medical Health, the vice president of behavioral health, Clay Chia, I give so many kudos to him from the moment we passed. And I called him. He was one of the people on my list to call. From the moment I called him, I said, "Clay, let's talk. We passed our legislation." He said, "Come on in." And I think I was in his office, 2 or 3 days after the end of June of 2014. And he said, "Okay, let's figure out how we can do this." So that medical center, and Dr. Gretchen Bowles, who is our number 5 prescribing psychologists, they value their numbers very, very highly. She is now directing the training program for our prescribing psychologist fellows in that medical center. And that medical center covers much of northern Illinois. So they have many other hospitals and outpatient centers where our prescribing psychology fellows can train. And we need 1,620 hours of training in the various 9 medical specialties, including an elective. So Dr. Derek Phillips, who many of us know, he was working at the Sarah Bush Medical Center in Decatur, Illinois, central Illinois. He was working there as a neuropsychologist while he was doing the training. And then he and I together met with his CEO and medical director, and we were able to create for him a fellowship training program for him while he was working there, so that he was able to get his 1,620 hours within all the different medical specialties. I was down a couple weeks ago at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and I have been talking to them for many years, since 2014, so 12 years. I've been talking with them and meeting with them, and they're very much interested in providing the didactic training, the MSCP, in addition to the fellowship training in Southern Illinois Healthcare Hospital down there. And then we actually have a prescribing psychology fellow who's an Illinois resident, will be prescribing in Illinois. She is now working in Cleveland as a psychologist, as a trauma psychologist. Her hospital applied to be an approved training setting for her to be able to do her 1,620 hours at that hospital. And so that hospital received approval from our Illinois state licensing board. So that's really fantastic. And so, over the years, the University of Chicago has provided some fellowship training for us. Other hospitals have provided training for us. So we are continuing to work with hospitals and medical centers. And again, the great gift of our legislation is the opportunity, the requirement and the opportunity to partner with medical centers in enabling us to do that. We have been able to then bring all of these physicians, psychiatrists, and med society on to support us as we move ahead with our legislation. So, for example, for this legislation now that's pending in our state, in our House, the Illinois Medical Society has removed its opposition. The Illinois Psychiatric Society still opposes, but the Illinois Med Society has removed its opposition. So that was key. And again, every step forward, we bring people with us. So it's very exciting.
Talk to us a little bit about the impact of the Illinois Prescriptive Authority, first nationally and especially in the surrounding states.
Well, the impact is that we've been able to significantly increase care to a population. So we now have 25 prescribing psychologists in Illinois. We have 1,100 psychiatrists. I expect that in the next 20 years, we will be able to double the number of prescribing providers in our state, because I believe that our numbers will continue to multiply exponentially. So one of the areas of which I'm particularly proud of in Illinois is that our legislation allows us to train undergraduates and to train graduate students. So our graduate students in Illinois can receive their MSCP alongside their PsyD or PhD in clinical psychology, and they do their rotations, their medical rotations, once they have received their doctoral degree, but they can get their MSCP as graduate students. Another fact that I was able to implement for us in Illinois is that I worked with the Department of Psychology at the University of Illinois in Champaign, Urbana, and I was able to work with the counselors in the psychology department to create a curriculum, a pre-prescribing psychologist curriculum at the undergraduate level. So we have 75 psychology undergraduate students at the University of Illinois who are doing required undergraduate science classes, which are very similar to a pre-med program, except we don't require organic chemistries. And those students can then move into their graduate training anywhere in the country and take the MSCP training with Alliant or any other of our MSCP training programs. And then they graduate with their doctoral degree with all of the prerequisites, except for the rotations, done. And then they could do the rotations at the same time that they do their clinical internship, their postgraduate clinical internship. So it's a wonderful, again, innovation in providing the opportunity for graduate students to get the MSCP, providing the opportunity for undergraduates to get the science classes under their belt as undergraduates. And that's where I see that we are then multiplicatively, exponentially increasing the number of prescribing psychologists to reach at least 1,100 prescribing psychologists in the next 20 years. I think we're still the only state that does allow for the MSCP to be earned at the graduate level, even though APA in 2019 passed a resolution approving the MSCP being earned at the graduate level.
Well, some states, like in New Mexico, there is in the statute of the state, there is
Yes.
no provision saying that the MSCP has to be obtained
Ah,
postdoctorally.
okay, wonderful.
It's just an open, it's a requirement that's listed that the applicant must possess that degree, but it is not specified that it has to be postdoctoral.
So I am hopeful that we evolve, and that as additional states pass the prescriptive authority legislation, that they just they don't say that it has to be postdoctoral. That just, that it has we have to have an MSCP, as we say in our legislation, as now New Mexico says in its legislation. Other states don't have the undergraduate training requirements that we have. Some of the newer states, like Vermont and Colorado, has some of the rotations that we have in Illinois. And again, as I said, our prescribing psychologists love the clinical rotations that we have, for the professional experience, for the professional networking that they can achieve during those rotations. And then, of course, the continual renewal of their CEs every 2 years. At 20, it's either 24 credits, depending on the state, or 48 credits every 2 years.
And I was also thinking, when I mentioned impact, I was also thinking about impact in surrounding states. So, for example, Iowa, since of course I've gotten RxP, right? And
Yeah, so we passed in 2014, Iowa passed in 2016, Idaho passed in 2017, um, Colorado passed in 23, Utah passed in 24. Vermont is now the first northeastern
right,
state that's passed now in 26. And we're looking at Hawaii, which
right.
seems to be on the verge of passing in 26, with the governor's hopefully with the governor's signature. So I think impact in terms of care, impact in terms of gathering momentum. I think we have tremendous momentum.
Tell us about some of the international impact as well.
Yes. So that's really exciting for us. I want to talk about South Africa. I want to talk about Canada. So Dr. Diana Belconia has led the Prescriptive Authority movement in the province of Ontario, the largest province in Canada, and a province with 16.8 million people. In Illinois, we have 12.4 million people. So in the United States, we're the most populous state that has prescriptive authority. But once the health minister approves the prescriptive authority in Ontario, which again is we're on the precipice there of approving it, that they will be the governmental entity that would be serving the most populous state or province in the world with prescriptive authority. So Diana has done a superb job since the early 2000s in organizing for prescriptive authority. They have a different process from what we have in the States. It has to go through the health minister, and then it goes to their provincial legislature. She has done just a superb job getting that done. And she and I are going to be presenting on prescriptive authority at the Canadian Psychological Association convention in a couple weeks, on June 4th, in Quebec, in Montreal. So that's very exciting. And then we have South Africa. So Dr. Tabiso Rapapali, Dr. Joachim Moreira, the MSCP from Alliant University, and they have been leading their country in the pursuit of training in clinical psychopharmacology, and working with their governmental entities to pass prescriptive authority in South Africa. And we've been closely aligned. Judy Steinman and I presented at the annual conference in 2022, SISA, the Psychological Association of South Africa, in 2022, and it was October of 2022. And I had the great privilege of going there in person. And Judy was able to present by Zoom. We had standing room only in our seminar room. There was so much excitement, and then just a wonderful photo of the reception that I received when I was there with psychologist colleagues in South Africa. And Dr. Tabiso Rapapali will be coming here along with his wife, Dr. Tina Rapapali, who is a anesthesiologists in South Africa. They'll be coming here to DC in August for our panel on prescriptive authority around the globe. And they'll also be presenting a special forum that I'm providing at my home right after, immediately following convention on August 9th. And Dr. Morera will be coming in by Zoom for our panel. Yvonne Sidejic is exploring prescriptive authority in Croatia. In Zagreb, we have Daniel Sullivan in Australia, who's exploring prescriptive authority in Australia. We have psychologists in Jamaica who are working on getting prescriptive authority passed. We have psychologists in the United Kingdom. We have psychologists in Norway. We have psychologists in Brazil. Tyann Albuquerque is working there. It's been so very exciting. We've worked with psychologists in Taiwan. We have many psychologists around the country, and we have psychologists in India who come in and talk about prescriptive authority.
I was going to mention Poland also.
And
Poland is
of
beginning
course,
to.
Poland, yes.
Oh,
So
yes,
Monica Cosi Gonzalez
right.
and Anna Maria Wigerek Skorupa are both Polish American psychologists who work with in Poland and have been organizing Polish psychologists. Has been fantastic, and Monica will be with us at our convention in August in DC, and will also be at our forum on Sunday, August 9th. So yes, it's very, very exciting. So the two Jamaican psychologists are Javila Ho and Kai Morgan. And those are our two leaders of the Jamaican Psychological Association. They're past presidents now of the Jamaican Psychological Association, but they've been have been and continue to lead the RxP movement in Jamaica.
Tremendous amount of influence worldwide now.
Yes,
With this
yes,
movement. That must be
yes,
very. That must be
and
very gratifying.
right. And I have to add, Oraim Tuchli, who's Jordanian American psychologist, who's faculty at Nova Southeastern University. She's been working very closely with the University of Jordan, and she is working to institute a training in clinical psychopharmacology. And she's involved all around the Middle East, including Iraq and Iran and Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and will be working to create psychopharmacology training programs in the Middle East. I am also working in Israel with psychologists there to include clinical psychopharmacology and training programs there. We are working throughout the world, and Oraib is going to be with us at our convention, speaking at our convention at APA, also for my forum on August 9th. So quite exciting.
Very exciting times.
Amazing.
Final
Amazing.
thoughts about your RxP journey in Illinois and otherwise.
I have been inspired by all of our colleagues who have been so excited about the opportunities to expand their training and be able to provide to their patients a full continuum of effective treatment. And I am thrilled. The work that you, George, do, and the work that all of our other training directors do around the country, that are the leaders of all of our prescriptive authority movements in this country and Canada and other parts of far flung around the world, the excitement that psychologists have to provide this kind of treatment, integrative treatment, comprehensive integrative treatment, and the excitement that our patients have that they go to a professional whom they trust, who understands their psychology and understands what their needs are psychopharmacologically. It's a very exciting prospect, and I'm just thrilled to be part of this movement and to lead us forward into the 21st century.
And we prescribing psychologists are inspired by your work, by your leadership. As the saying goes, we step on the shoulder of the giants of the movement who've paved the way for us, and you're one of them. I am thrilled that you're able to join us today. Thank you. And everyone, we will see you next time in another episode of the history and continuing evolution of RxP.
Thank you, George, so much. This has been such an honor.